Hallo Leute, ich bin Dennis, ich wohne in Russland und arbeite als Hauptwebentwickler bei einer großen Firma. Ich lerne Deutsch seit 3 Jahren, weil Deutschland ein schönes Land ist und ich früher, als ich kleiner war, nicht weit von Berlin gewohnt habe. Und ihr seht Deutsch für euch?
Next grammar topic, nämlich Präfixe. Prefixes. Yes, Damen und Herren, your prayers have been heard. I'm finally gonna talk about this topic. These pesky little things that can either add to the meaning of verbs or change their meaning completely. Today I'll just be doing an overview episode, as I'm fairly sure that will already be giving me an episode of like 15 minutes or so. Which means that I will probably have about half an hour of raw material at least. Oh. So, for everyone who has no idea what prefixes are, they are 1 or 2 syllable add-ons that are added in front of a verb to somehow alter its meaning. Most of them, depending on the language, do not occur independently, which is why we consider them particles. So these would be things like an, pre, over, in, and so on and so forth. In German, these are especially important because we have a ton of verbs that basically just consist of a base verb that has been combined with some sort of prefix. And trust me, I feel your pain because Russian is all about the preficated verbs. So, usually, preficated verbs have to be considered new words overall, which means that it's usually better to just learn them as if they were completely new vocabulary instead of deriving them. However, deriving can work if you are aware of what the prefixes can mean, usually mean whatever. So, what usually does the trick, in most cases, is a combination of learning them and having some rules in mind. So, business as usual for the DFA crowd. In total, German has 38 of these prefixes, or 39 if you count another one that we get by combining 2 of the 38 ones. Among these, there are 3 groups. One group that can be detached from the verb in combined speech, which is the biggest group. One verb that can never be detached from the verb. And a third one, which can be detached or non-detached, depending on how you emphasize it. In written language, it's usually really hard to tell which verb belongs to which group, unless they're used in a real full text, because you cannot read emphasis. But if you've ever heard them said before, preferably by a native speaker, then it's really easy to tell whether or not the prefix of the verb is detachable. If the emphasis in the word falls into the prefix, then it's detachable. If it doesn't fall into the prefix, so somewhere within the base verb, it's not detachable. That's also the rule for the verbs that can go both ways, by the way. Meaning that these verbs exist in 2 variants, not only by how they act in a sentence, but also by how you emphasize them. So there's one version where the emphasis falls onto the prefix, and one version where it falls onto the base verb. Nice example sentence for that is, Du sollst den Polizisten umfahren, nicht umfahren, which translates to, you're supposed to drive around the officer, not run into him. So the verb umfahren is emphasized on fahren, the base verb, which means that the prefix is not detachable. Put together, umfahren means to drive around something, to avoid driving into something. While umfahren is emphasized on the prefix, and that therefore means that is detachable in combined speech. And together, this verb means to drive into somebody. Yes, this is going to be a lot of fun. So that means, of course, that with the verbs that go both ways, the way you emphasize it is not by any means arbitrary, but depends on the meaning you're going for. Now, a quick explanation for why this is even important to know besides that very small group that can go both ways. This all becomes interesting in combined speech because, in this case, that was a really high this. There are scenarios in which detachable prefixes will get detached, and undetachable prefixes will not get detached. If we take, for example, the verb weggehen, which means to go away or to leave, to properly use it in a sentence, we would have to be aware that the prefix weg is always detachable. So the sentence I'm leaving does not ever translate to ich weggehe, but instead to ich gehe weg. On the other hand, the verb entgehen, which in our case means something like to slip by somebody or to pass by somebody in the sense that it is a synonym for to miss out on, has a non-detachable prefix, ent, and therefore has to be used in a sentence as follows. English example, this opportunity won't slip past me. In German, that would be, diese Chance entgeht mir nicht. As a reminder, if this was a detachable prefix, it would end up being, diese Chance geht mir nicht ent. That doesn't make any sense, though. to take a sentence with weggehen that's closer to that, we could say, ich gehe nicht weg. So there you can see the difference. Diese Chance entgeht mir nicht. But ich gehe nicht weg. This happens in the Präteritum too. Ich ging nicht weg. But diese Chance entging mir nicht. However, as soon as we're using combined forms, so a Hilfsverb and Vollverb construction, or the perfect, or the Futur 2, or the Plusquamperfekt, so any of the combined tenses, or any of those other cases where we have multiple verbs combined, this gets a whole lot easier suddenly. Because in these cases, since the preficated verb is usually the meaning verb, it all gets to stay together anyway, no matter if the prefix is detachable or not, because it stays in the infinitive. As in, ich will weggehen. I want to leave. Weggehen, we learned that's detachable, but that would be ich will weggehen. Because our conjugated verb here is wollen. Ich will. So weggehen stays in its infinitive, which means it stays together. Same thing if we were just using the perfect of ich gehe weg, which would then be ich bin weggegangen. So here we just need the Partizip 2 of gehen and apply weg before it, and we're good. And of course, it's the same thing for non-detachable prefixes, because why would they suddenly get detached here? Diese Chance wird mir nicht entgehen. And diese Chance ist mir nicht entgangen. So that means that this might be the only case, or at least one of the only cases, where the combined tenses are actually a lot easier to grasp than the present and the preteritum. Yay! If you count 38 prefixes, we have 23 detachable prefixes. If you count 39, we have 24. That leaves us with 9 non-detachable prefixes and a rest of 6 indecisive ones. So starting next grammar session, I will go through all of them and talk about their general meaning that you can expect. Keep in mind already that this is not universal, because sometimes a combined prefix form just means something entirely different than both the prefix and the main verb. But usually, most prefixes have some sort of basic meaning that they add to a verb. I'm pretty sure that will turn into 2 episodes because there are so many detachable prefixes, but we'll see. In the episode after that, if you need it, which I think you probably do, I will take on the task of explaining more stuff about how to use them in sentences and some examples and just general syntax and application help. But beyond that, the old rule goes, practice, practice, practice. But for now, that's it for today. If you want to get a copy of the script for today's episode and every other grammar episode in the past and in the future, support me on Patreon, which is always linked in the description, and toss me a note on there with an email address that you use for Dropbox, and I will add you to the folder once your first pledge goes through. Your random word of the week is
Der Sonnenuntergang.
At 3 p.m., mind you. Winter isn't coming, it's definitely here. Bis nächste Woche. Tschüss! What the fuck was that?